Hey guys, tonight we saddle up for a reality check. Being a medieval knight might sound impressive, but in truth, it was mostly mud, bruises, and a never-ending list of people you had to impress or kneel to. Let's start at the very beginning. The noble dream of chivalry starts when you're still losing baby teeth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're about 7 years old when your life is yanked onto the night track. You don't get a choice. If your family's noble, or even pretending to be, you're bundled off to someone else's castle. Not Hogwarts. Not even a fun boarding school. You're a page now, which is a fancy way of saying child servant in training armor. Your day starts before sunrise, helping the older squires saddle horses, polish armor, and mop up whatever the falcons left behind. You're also expected to be cheerful, polite, and competent, despite having slept 4 hours and having a snotty nose. If you do your job wrong, a grumpy knight might fling a chicken bone at your head. Or worse, assign you to clean the latrines. Oh, and training? Endless. You're whacked with wooden swords so often your knuckles swell like overripe berries. There's a lot of yelling, balance drills, mock duels, and running in chainmail until your legs feel like wet bread. Historians still argue whether these harsh methods were truly effective or just traditional macho hazing. By age 14, you're promoted to squire. Now it's serious. You assist a full knight. That means lugging their armor, feeding their horses, and learning the art of warfare up close. In battle, your job might be to drag your knight's unconscious body to safety, then try not to die doing it. Your own armor? Still secondhand and a bit moldy. Not that your superiors care. You're expected to be respectful, quick, and invisible unless spoken to. Drop a helmet? You're humiliated. Spill a drink on a noble's tunic? Might as well start packing for monastery school. Even bathing is rare, unless you count falling in a river while chasing a runaway chicken. There's also a kind of psychological torment no one warns you about. Because amid all the bruises and blisters, you're being spoon-fed romantic tales of heroism and courtly love. Stories where knights win glory and get the girl. In practice, you're more likely to win lice and get a stern lecture about modesty from the chaplain. Want to relax? Maybe play a lute? No time. You're memorizing heraldry symbols and family feuds in case you insult someone at court and start a duel. Heaven forbid you confuse the wrong coat of arms and compliment someone's mortal enemy. That's a real faux pas, possibly fatal. And of course, there's the looming anxiety of knighthood itself. You're told it's the highest honor, but you've also seen knights come back from battle missing important parts. One came back talking to trees. Another never returned at all. There's a whispered understanding among the squires. Not all promotions are worth it. Still, you press on. You learn to mount a horse in full gear. You memorize the steps to the perfect bow. You take lessons in swordplay, even if the sword is longer than your torso. You try not to flinch when a crossbow is fired near your head during drills. everyone flinches, but only you are told off for it. One fringe detail. Squires often learn to write poetry and play chess. Not for fun. These were noble arts. You could get yelled at for a poor rhyming couplet, same as for poor footwork. And chess? Less a game, more a way to test if your brain still worked after getting smacked with a shield. The day finally comes. You're tapped on the shoulder with a sword and declared a knight. The ceremony is solemn. There's a clean tunic, prayers, sometimes a symbolic bath, though they had to scrape mud off you first. You kneel, swear oaths, and stand taller, slightly terrified. You've made it, sort of. Because being a knight isn't a reward, it's a new level of stress. But we'll get to that soon. For now, your aching arms, bruised shins, and a decade of servitude are the price of entry. And while songs may celebrate your rise, you'll mostly remember the smell of wet leather and the metallic tang of your own nosebleed. You've made it. You're a knight. People now call you Sir, and theoretically, you've entered a world of glory, feasts, and honor. But your very first lesson, post-knighthood, that magnificent suit of armor everyone's so obsessed with, it's a nightmare. Let's start with the cost. You'd think your noble title comes with a generous wardrobe stipend. Nope. That shimmering set of plate armor cost more than most peasants will earn in a lifetime. You either go into debt, beg your liege for hand-me-downs, or settle for a mismatched clanky ensemble that makes you look like you robbed a scarecrow in a blacksmith's yard sale. Putting it on takes an eternity. First, the linen undergarments, then the padded gambeson, then chainmail, which feels like being wrapped in iron spaghetti, only heavier. Then come the plates. Greaves for your legs, cuirass for your chest, vambraces for your arms, gauntlets that turn fine motor skills into a distant dream. Top it all off with a helmet that makes your head feel like it's trapped inside a biscuit tin during a thunderstorm. And you need help to get into all of this. A squire, or two if you're lucky, must wrestle each piece onto you like they're trying to gift wrap a boulder. Don't even think about putting it on alone. If you fall over mid-process, you may just lie there, flailing helplessly like an overturned turtle. Once you're finally suited up, you're struck by a new horror. You can't move. Well, you can, but it's less gallant warrior and more arthritic golem. Walking turns into an awkward shuffle. Stairs are your mortal enemy, and God help you if nature calls. The armor doesn't come off easily. If you need the privy mid-battle, you just go. Right there, in the pants. It's why many knights had to quietly suffer honorably with soiled leggings and a straight face. And then, there's heat. Imagine wearing a pizza oven, in the sun, with no ventilation. Sweat pours down your back. The inside of your helmet becomes a personal humidity chamber. You can't even scratch your nose. One knight in the 14th century reportedly passed out from heat exhaustion during a parade, just from standing still. Historians still argue whether full plate armor was truly battle efficient or more of an aristocratic fashion flex. Sure, it protected you from swords and arrows, until someone with a mace came along. Maces don't pierce, they crush. Your armor holds firm while your ribs don't. It's like being safe inside a can while everything inside is turned to soup. Oh, and remember, This expensive, heavy contraption isn't for occasional wear. You're expected to ride horses in it. Fancy war horses bred to carry all that weight, yours and your armor's. But these animals are temperamental. Some bite, some kick, some panic at the sight of fire and take off, dragging your tin-clad body behind like a sad parade float. And horses? Another enormous expense. Armor for them too. Not as intricate, but still costly. Your horse needs food, shoes, grooming, and medical care. Yes, medieval horse doctors existed, though their advice sometimes included feed it garlic or bleed it gently. Quirky side note: some knights would name their armor just like you'd name a car or pet, Old Biter or Lady Faithful. A few even whispered to it before battle, like some kind of sweaty metal best friend. But even a personalized suit can't save you from rust. Everything rusts. Even if you're meticulous, one wet campaign or sweaty patrol and your prized armor starts turning orange. So you spend hours scrubbing, oiling, and muttering about weather gods with a grudge. The final indignity: you look majestic from afar, but up close, you smell terrible. The padding under your armor is rarely washed. Why? Because it's hard to dry and even harder to replace. After a few weeks of marching or jousting, it's basically a wearable petri dish. You can try perfumes or lavender sachets, but let's be honest, you still smell like armored cheese. And yet, you're expected to carry yourself with poise. Nobles are watching. Ladies are judging. Your enemies are hoping you trip on your own sabatons. And beneath it all, you just want to lie down, peel everything off, and breathe. But there's no time. Duty calls, and your next destination? The battlefield, where your shining armor meets its next opponent, the horrifying chaos of war. So here you are, finally on the battlefield. All those years of bruised knees, awkward armor fittings, and poetic oaths have led to this moment. You expect trumpets, applause, maybe a cool breeze to flutter your banner dramatically. Instead, you get mud, a horse that won't stop sidestepping in panic, and the growing realization that no one has any idea what's going on. Welcome to medieval warfare. Movies love to depict knights charging in perfect V formations, banners flying, swords glinting in slow motion. But what it usually feels like is a medieval traffic jam. Everyone's shouting. Your visor fogs up instantly. You can't see who's friend or foe. And your glorious, very expensive helmet? It muffles every command. So when someone yells retreat, you just hear grr and keep charging forward like a heroic idiot. You reach the enemy line, or rather, a mess of shields, spears, and equally sweaty guys. Then the real fun begins. Pushing, grunting, screaming, slipping in puddles you hope are just mud, and trying to swing a sword without hitting your own side. Spoiler: you probably will. Historians still argue whether knights were more likely to die from enemy blows or friendly chaos in the melee. It's not elegant, it's not poetic, it's survival in slow motion. Let's talk about breathability. Inside that helmet, the air is a stew of metal, blood, and your own terror. You start to pant, then choke, then panic. And yet you have to maintain focus, because a single lapse could mean a mace to the head, or worse, a spear to the horse, which then collapses and pins your armored body to the dirt like a medieval paperweight. If you're unhorsed, things spiral. That heavy armor you thought was protecting you, it now makes getting up nearly impossible without help. And guess what? Everyone's too busy not dying to lend a hand. You're crawling, slipping, flailing. Easy pickings for some foot soldier with a dagger and nothing to lose. Ah, yes, the dreaded foot soldiers. Not peasants with pitchforks, but trained infantry armed with polearms, the great equalizer. Long spears, axes on sticks, nasty hooks designed to yank knights off horses like fish from a pond. And these guys fight in coordinated lines, especially the Swiss or Flemish. They hate you. You represent feudal oppression, so they stab with enthusiasm. There are horror stories, fringe accounts of knights getting stuck upside down in ditches, legs kicking in the air like a turtle doing interpretive dance. One chronicler claims a knight was dragged face first through the muck by his own horse for 30 yards. Nobody rescued him. They were too busy laughing. And if you do survive the melee, congratulations. You're now dehydrated, bruised, and probably missing at least one valuable object. A helmet, a gauntlet, or say, your dignity. If captured, you might be ransomed. But if the captors are feeling salty, or you insulted someone's uncle in attorney 5 years ago, they might just take your armor and let you limp home in your underclothes. Of course, there's no real medical help waiting. The best case scenario? A priest praying over your wounds while someone with dirty hands tries to remove arrowheads using kitchen tongs. Worst case? The wound is cleaned with wine and sealed with fire. A bit of charcoal, maybe. Herbal poultices, if someone has a vague idea about plants. Quirky side note. Some knights believed carrying a relic, like a bone chip from a saint, would protect them in battle. These were sometimes sewn into the lining of their tunics, or even tucked into helmet crevices. Did it work? Hard to say. The dead ones didn't get to offer reviews. You lie awake after the fight, armor half off, wondering if you made the right life choice. No one sings ballads about the part where you nearly vomited in your helmet, or the smell of burning horsehair, or the guy who accidentally stabbed his own cousin. But hey, at least you didn't die, this time. And after all this, you'd think someone would say thank you. Maybe a warm meal, a place to rest? Not quite. You'll probably be sent back out tomorrow. Maybe to guard a bridge. Maybe to hold a banner. Maybe just to stand still and look imposing, even though your knees are screaming. So yes, battle may be glorious in poems, but in reality, it's pain, panic, and praying you don't end up trampled, roasted in your own armor, or humiliated by some peasant with a sharp stick. If the mud, sweat, and mild risk of being unceremoniously skewered weren't bad enough, let's talk about the one thing that was supposed to make it all worthwhile. The code of chivalry. Ah, yes. That noble, shining beacon of knightly virtue. You know the drill. Protect the weak. Serve your lord. Honor the church. Be courteous to ladies. Never run from battle. Always tell the truth, even if it means getting your head chopped off. Sounds noble, right? Except no one bothered to mention that the code is impossibly demanding, frequently ignored, and absolutely never helps you when your boots are on fire. In theory, you're expected to live like a cross between a monk, a bodyguard, and a poet. In practice, You're more like an overworked security guard with expensive accessories and chronic back pain. Take protect the weak, for instance. Who exactly are the weak? The peasants? They're terrified of you. You just rode through their fields with 20 armed men and took their best pigs for military purposes. Women? Sure, you're supposed to be courteous. Unless you're defending your lord's honor, in which case you might be asked to burn down their entire village because some merchant insulted his horse. Historians still argue whether chivalry was ever seriously followed outside of tournament speeches and church sermons. Many believe it was more of a PR campaign for the knightly class, a way to make brutal mercenaries look like moral role models. Spoiler: it didn't always work. Then there's the awkwardness of interpretation. Never strike a defenseless foe. Does that include bandits? What if they're running away? What if they insulted your beard? Chivalry becomes a choose-your-own-adventure book, except every choice ends in a duel or another lecture from your confessor. Speaking of which, the church plays a huge role in enforcing this code, not because they love ethics, but because knights were incredibly hard to manage. They needed to be pointed like angry, shiny weapons at the right targets. So clergy developed rules to guide knightly rage toward approved enemies. Heretics, pagans, rival nobles who didn't tithe properly. You're also expected to be humble, which is difficult when your armor gleams like polished silver, your horse is braided with ribbons, and the local innkeeper has to bow every time you sneeze. But God help you if you seem too proud. That's a sin. Vanity could send you straight to hell, no matter how many dragons you've allegedly slain. Let's talk about romance, another chivalric trap. Courtly love, they call it. You're supposed to pine hopelessly for some noble lady, write her awkward poems, and fight duels in her honor. Meanwhile, she's married to a duke who hates you and has 3 sons with better horses. You spend months mooning over someone who doesn't know your name, and if she does, thinks you're the sweaty guy who spilled wine on her slippers at last year's harvest banquet. Still, you compose verses. Bad ones. Your squire reads them aloud. The horses judge you silently. Here's a quirky little tidbit. Some knightly orders had their own version of tinder, heraldic tokens you'd wear to signal which lady you served. It was like broadcasting your hopeless crush with embroidery. Occasionally, this led to duels. More often, it led to confusion and mild embarrassment. But failure to follow the chivalric code could be dangerous. If you acted dishonorably, even if accidentally, you could be shamed, exiled, or stripped of your title. There were cases of knights being publicly disgraced, their spurs chopped off, their armor smashed in front of an audience. It's like getting fired with a parade of shame. Even among fellow knights, the pressure to conform was intense. Everyone's watching for the tiniest slip. Use the wrong greeting? Someone accuses you of lacking respect. Laugh at a joke too heartily? Clearly you're mocking your lord. Walk too slowly to kneel? Oh, you're arrogant. Fast forward a few hours, and you're in a duel defending your honor because you sneezed too confidently. And those duels? They weren't always glamorous. Sometimes it's muddy grappling in front of unimpressed sheep, or a formal tournament where the audience is only half paying attention while you get concussed for glory and questionable prize money. You start to notice something strange. The more perfectly you follow the code, the more exhausted you become, and the less anyone seems to care. Your Lord still sends you on errands like a glorified delivery man. The clergy still warns you about sin. The ladies still prefer the night with better shoes and a catchy lute song. So you march onward, painfully upright, pretending you're noble and good and calm, while secretly wondering if anyone else is faking it too. Because while the code of chivalry may promise dignity and purpose, it mostly delivers headaches and humiliation. Now that you've memorized 100 contradictory chivalric ideals and learned how to bow without creaking audibly, let's talk about feudal obligations, the legal spaghetti bowl you've just pledged yourself into. See, knighthood isn't just a title, it's a job, and not even a fun one. As a knight, you're not just a fighter, you're a vassal, a tenant, a taxpayer, and a very well-armed errand boy. You've sworn an oath of fealty to your liege lord, which means that technically, your life is no longer yours. You've pledged to defend his lands, enforce his justice, and show up whenever he bangs a horn and yells, "To arms." Sounds fair, except your lord is also tangled in alliances with other lords who are fighting their enemies, who are sometimes also your friends, cousins, or poker night companions. So 1 week, you're defending a bridge for Duke Alain. The next, you're riding against Count Theobald, who just last year hosted you for wine and roasted quail. You don't make the decisions. You're a chess piece, moved around the board by men who eat better and bathe more often than you. Historians still argue whether knights truly understood the full network of feudal ties they were part of, or if they just went wherever the loudest noble yelled from. Feudal duties aren't limited to fighting either. Sometimes you're summoned to a court session to serve as muscle during a land dispute. Other times you're told to collect taxes from peasants who can barely afford onions, let alone gold. There's no instruction manual for this, just vague expectations like maintain order and represent the crown. No pressure. You also have to maintain your own gear: armor, weapons, horses, tents, cloaks, banners, spare boots. You fund it all. No reimbursement. You're responsible for your war horse's feed, your squire's wages, and your own travel expenses. If a wheel breaks on your supply wagon, that's your problem. If a servant steals your saddle, also your problem. This means that knights were often financially strained, despite their noble status. Some took out loans. Others married for money. Awkward, loveless unions with heiresses whose fathers wanted muscle, not poetry. Occasionally, you'd hear about a knight who tried to make ends meet by robbing travelers, which is technically a war crime, but who's checking? One quirky custom. When you inherited land as a knight, you sometimes had to pay a relief, a feudal fee to your lord, just to claim what was already supposed to be yours. Imagine buying your house twice with a sword to your throat the second time. Charming. And then there's the constant message delivery. Knights were often sent on diplomatic missions, which sounds fancy until you realize it means traveling hundreds of miles on horseback just to deliver a scroll. No one says, "Thank you." Sometimes you arrive to find your recipient has died, been excommunicated, or decided to marry your sister without asking. Back you go, You're also expected to host your own Lord whenever he visits, which might be twice a year, or 5 times in 1 month. You're to provide food, entertainment, and clean sheets for an entourage of 20 men and possibly a whiny hunting falcon. And if the stew's too salty, you're never hearing the end of it. And the church, bless them, expects contributions too. Not just gold, but nights. Some lords will donate you to crusades or local holy causes. One day, you're minding your estate. The next, you're signed up for a distant pilgrimage with vague instructions and very little armor insurance. There's a reason many knights owned multiple oaths. You could be sworn to your regional lord, a larger duke, and even the king all at once. Conflicts of interest? Constant. But refusing to serve any of them could brand you a traitor. So you juggle. Badly. Like a sleep-deprived jester with 3 flaming swords and a migraine. Still, appearances must be kept. You have to maintain decorum, wear the right livery, and attend every feast, wedding, and funeral you're invited to. Even if it means traveling for weeks just to nod politely at a cousin you've never met. And when your lord decides it's time to build a castle extension, guess who provides labor? That's right, you. Not swinging a hammer yourself, of course, but organizing the effort, funding materials, and making sure the stonemason doesn't run off with the scaffolding. The weight of all these expectations grinds you down, and unlike battle, which ends eventually, feudal obligations go on forever. There is no retirement party, no pension, just more oaths, more favors owed, more festivals you have to attend while pretending your knees don't hurt. So while the poems speak of gallant knights who roam freely, you now realize you're bound more tightly than your favorite stirrups. Caught in a web of allegiance, loyalty, debt, and politics. And there's no escape short of death or divine intervention. If the political backflips and financial quicksand weren't enough to ruin your nightly swagger, let's now discuss the very unglamorous realities of hygiene and healthcare. Because even the shiniest suit of armor can't protect you from a festering boil, a rotten tooth, or a bad case of what is that smell, and why is it coming from me? Let's start with bathing, or the lack thereof. Medieval knights didn't exactly soak in rose-scented tubs on the regular. Water was cold, scarce, and often riddled with bacteria no one could pronounce. Some believed bathing opened the skin's pores, making you vulnerable to illness. Others simply didn't have time. And with all that armor rubbing against sweat-soaked padding, you're essentially walking around inside a medieval crock-pot. The result? Skin conditions, rashes, chafing that could sand the finish off a church pew. Historians still argue how often knights truly bathed, but most agree it wasn't often enough to be described with the word routine. Quirky detail. Some knights carried tiny pouches of herbs or dried flowers inside their armor, not for magic, but to mask the odor. Think of it as medieval Febreze. Unfortunately, a sachet of lavender doesn't stand much chance against a week-long campaign in wet boots. Speaking of boots, let's talk about your feet. They're damp, constantly. Between rain, stream crossings, and the slow interior swamp of your sabatons, you've got a fungal nightmare brewing. There's no such thing as breathable footwear. Toenails blacken and fall off. Blisters turn to ulcers, and trench foot, though not named yet, is definitely happening. Now, should any of these delightful symptoms require treatment, you'll find yourself in the hands of a medieval physician, a man who probably believes that disease comes from imbalanced humors and that the solution is to stab you with leeches. Bloodletting is standard. So is urine analysis, which means someone swirls your pee in a jar and then makes vaguely ominous predictions based on the color. There are also barber surgeons who are exactly what they sound like, barbers who also do surgery. You walk in for a beard trim and leave with a cauterized thigh wound and possibly a new nickname like Lefty. No anesthetic, of course, just a leather strap to bite and a strong sense of denial. Get an infection? Hope for a miracle cure. Pilgrimages to holy sites were common, especially if someone said Saint whoever's toenail had healing properties. Pilgrimage or placebo, it was still better than your local apothecary's advice to rub raw garlic on it and chant 3 psalms. Now imagine getting sick while on campaign. You're miles from any settlement, sleeping on wet ground, sharing firewood with half the army. Food is salty, dry, or suspiciously gray. Water, boiled if you're lucky, straight from the stream if not. Diarrhea is not a question of if, but when and how violently. Soldiers joke about it, but many simply don't return from campaign, not because of arrows, but because their intestines lost the will to live. And wounds, oh, the wounds. If you're lucky, a clean sword slice might heal. But most battlefield injuries are blunt trauma, gashes from jagged metal, or punctures from arrows that break off inside you. There's no sterilization. They'll dig around with a dirty knife and pack the wound with moss, honey, or chewed-up bread. One knight reportedly used spider webs as bandages. It kind of works. Kind of. Lose a limb? Prosthetics exist, but they're crude. Wooden legs, iron hooks. Functional if you're stationary. Decorative, mostly. The best you can hope for is to become a grim inspiration at the Lord's feasts, wheeled out occasionally to show what loyalty looks like when it limps. Dental problems? Don't even ask. There's no dentistry. Your teeth rot, crack, and fall out. You can try to pull them yourself or beg a blacksmith to do it for you with pliers. Toothaches become a kind of background static in your life. Just another layer of pain beneath your chainmail. Now factor in mental health, which no one talks about. Nightmares, tremors, panic attacks. These weren't seen as trauma. They were called cowardice, sin, or demonic possession. You're expected to endure. Laugh at pain. Ride toward danger with a smile. Meanwhile, your thoughts spiral at night while rats scuttle under your cot. One fringe tradition involved sleeping with blessed charms, or even dried frog parts under your pillow to ward off illness and nightmares. Whether it worked is up for debate, but it was at least something you could do in a world where most healing involved guesswork and hope. So between your armor chafing like a cheese grater, your knees turning into gravel, and your breath smelling like spoiled onions, being a knight isn't so much a role as it is a slow-motion medical emergency with a title. And yet, you carry on, because the only thing worse than getting sick, injured, or generally falling apart is being seen doing it. So maybe you're thinking, well, at least there were tournaments, right? Those grand festive affairs with flags waving, trumpets blaring, maidens cheering. And you, the shining knight, thundering down the list, lance poised, ready to win fame and glory? Yes, tournaments existed, but so did concussions, crushed collarbones, and a deeply uncomfortable amount of awkward politics. You arrive at the tourney grounds, expecting a noble sporting event. What you get is a mixture of performance, gambling, and low-key warfare with rules that change mid-swing. The line between friendly contest and open hostility is razor thin and often blurred by whatever noble grudge someone's nursing that day. You suit up in your finest armor, which, surprise, isn't even your real battle gear. No, you need a special tournament suit, often heavier and more padded to reduce fatalities, which sounds good in theory, except it also reduces visibility and flexibility. You feel like you're trapped inside a very angry bell. The joust begins. You line up on your war horse, gripping a lance as long as a fishing pole for whales. Across from you, a rival knight who might be smiling or gritting his teeth with years of silent vengeance. At the signal you charge, your lance tip wobbles, your horse swerves slightly, your visor slides half shut, and then, impact. Your chest explodes in pressure. The world spins. You're either still mounted, miracle, or you're now airborne, arcing like a sack of turnips over a fence. If you're lucky, you land in straw. If not, congratulations. You just discovered a new fracture. Historians still argue whether tournament injuries were deadlier than battlefield ones. The difference? On the battlefield, people expect to get hurt. At a tournament, they're just trying to win a favor and maybe impress Lady Maud. And speaking of impressing ladies, that's a whole battlefield of its own. Courtly love rules the social side of the tournament. You're expected to wear a noblewoman's favor, her glove, her ribbon, or maybe an awkwardly symbolic acorn carved out of soapstone, and dedicate your performance to her. A romantic gesture, until you realize she's not watching, or worse, she's clearly cheering for your opponent. There's even a fringe case of a knight who lost a duel only to find out the lady he'd been fighting for had accidentally given favors to both contestants. She claimed she liked the drama. Beyond the joust, there's the melee, a chaotic free-for-all where groups of knights bash each other in mock battles that are anything but mock. It's supposed to be controlled. It rarely is. You can get blindsided by a mace while tying your helmet strap, and no one will pause to help. Someone might even grab your horse and gallop off yelling, "Spoils." And then there are court rivalries. You think you're here to show off your prowess, but behind the scenes, lords are watching, betting, whispers spread. Did you see how Sir Reynard fell off his horse? Bit clumsy with that second parry. His boots don't match. One bad performance, and your reputation starts bleeding before you do. You also have to network. Smile. Compliment people you dislike. Nod at that one baron who spilled wine on your tabard last Christmas. Attend banquets where the food is rich, the wine flows too freely, and someone will inevitably challenge someone else to a rematch because of a badly told joke involving goats. Quirky custom alert. Some knights participated in pas d'armes, where they'd set up a tent along a road and challenge all passing knights to duels. just to prove how chivalrous and gallant they were. Basically, a medieval flex booth. Most travelers hated it, but refusing a duel could tarnish your honor. And then there's the cost. Armor repairs, horse feed, new banners, gifts for the lady whose favor you're courting. It adds up fast. Some knights went into debt just to attend a major tourney. Others tried to win money in the lists. That rarely went well. One bad day, and you're down a horse, a helmet, and your only good teeth. Even if you win, prizes are complicated. You might be awarded a purse of coins, a brooch, or a kiss on the cheek in front of 30 leering squires. Sometimes you just win a title that gives you bragging rights, but no tangible reward, like champion of the autumn tilt. Impressive at parties, useless when you're out of oats and your squire needs boots. And don't forget the injuries. They linger. A dislocated shoulder doesn't heal right. A broken rib never quite stops clicking. A bad fall might leave you walking like a marionette in a windstorm. You try to mask it with dignity, but even your horse can tell something's off. So yes, tournaments could be glamorous on the outside, but beneath the banners and fanfare was a very real risk of humiliation, injury, and getting caught in court gossip so petty it could ignite a 100-year feud. And still, you'd do it again. Because even if your lungs rattle and your joints creak like a drawbridge in January, a moment of glory in the tournament ring is the closest you'll ever get to being seen as something more than just a pawn in rusty plate. As if jousting your spleen into mush and navigating court politics in full armor weren't enough. Let's now add a little spiritual dread to the mix. Because being a knight wasn't just about surviving battle or remembering whose daughter not to insult at the banquet. It was also about making sure God didn't hate you. Religion was everywhere. Every decision you made, what you ate, who you fought, how you dressed, was filtered through the lens of divine judgment. You weren't just upholding chivalry. You were supposedly part of a sacred brotherhood, a holy warrior class tasked with defending Christendom itself. Sounds impressive, until you realize that the church's idea of holy warfare was often a polite way of saying, "We'd like you to go die somewhere hot, dusty, and far away." Enter the Crusades. The Pope would send out a call, gilded in phrases like eternal glory and forgiveness of sins. And before you've finished polishing your gauntlets, you're being invited to march thousands of miles eastward to fight in a place you've never seen, against people you don't understand, for reasons that grow fuzzier the longer you travel. Participation was technically voluntary. Emotionally, not so much. If you refused, your fellow knights whispered. The clergy frowned. Your local abbess started side-eyeing you during Mass. Historians still argue how much pressure was applied socially versus spiritually. But once the bugle called, your choices narrowed fast. You prepare by liquidating your assets, selling land, mortgaging livestock, maybe pawning your late uncle's ceremonial boots. The church promised spiritual rewards, not practical logistics. You brought your own food, own weapons, own transportation, and often your own coffin. Some had it built in advance, like a grim travel trunk. The journey is brutal. Months of marching through deserts and hostile territory. You face bandits, starvation, and so many blisters you start naming them. Disease runs rampant, dysentery, typhus, and something one night simply called the burning inside. Quirky side note: some knights believed drinking holy water before battle would protect them. It didn't, but it did give them stomach cramps. And then, finally, you reach the Holy Land, or the holy battlefield. It's unclear. You fight, bleed, pray, fight some more. You see things you can't unsee: pillaging, fire, confused screams in unfamiliar tongues. The line between sacred duty and basic survival becomes dangerously thin. Your spiritual questions don't end here. Back home, you're expected to attend Mass regularly, donate generously to the church, and avoid sin, while also skewering people with swords. It's a delicate balance. You might spend the morning helping a monastery rebuild its wall, and the afternoon burning down a village because your lord suspects it supports the wrong side. The guilt builds. Every lie, every moment of cruelty, every time you yelled at your squire for losing your polishing cloth, it all weighs on you. So you seek absolution. You confess, repeatedly. Priests begin to recognize your voice. One even starts pre-writing your penance. And yet, doubt creeps in. What if you're not truly forgiven? What if the sacraments didn't take? What if that sarcastic thought about your bishop during Lent counts? There are also pilgrimages, the medieval version of spiritual customer service. Walk hundreds of miles to visit a shrine, kiss a relic, and pray that your eternal soul's warranty is still valid. You do this in full gear, in summer, with fleas. To hedge your bets, you collect holy tokens, a bit of St. James's bone, some dirt from Golgotha, a suspiciously tooth-shaped relic labeled of St. George. These are tucked into your gear like spiritual insurance. Some knights even request to be buried with them, just in case. But for all your devotion, the church is watching closely. You drink too much at a feast? Sin. You punch another knight over a poker game? Sin. You doubt a relic's authenticity? Big sin. You're expected to be devout but not superstitious, humble but fierce, poor in spirit but rich enough to fund your own campaign. It's a theological tightrope, and you're walking it in full armor. And don't forget indulgences, those handy get-out-of-purgatory cards the church sells. A donation here, a vow there, and suddenly your afterlife scorecard looks a bit better. It's convenient, if a little suspicious. Even some clergy quietly wonder whether the whole system's just a fundraiser in a fancy hat. Still, you cling to it. Because being a knight means facing death constantly, and you need to believe that it all leads somewhere. That the broken bones, the pain, the exhaustion, the terrible poetry you wrote for that duchess who never looked your way. It all matters, that you're not just rusting on the edge of someone else's war. But deep down, as you kneel in a candlelit chapel, armor clicking faintly with every breath, a thought lingers. What if heaven's gates don't swing open for tired knights? You try not to ask that aloud. Time moves strangely for a knight. One day you're charging across a muddy field with your visor down and your name being shouted by drunk minstrels. The next, you're 45. Your left knee doesn't bend, and your squire has to help you off the horse like he's lowering a bucket into a well. The problem is, there's no retirement plan for knights. You don't get a pension. There's no peaceful country estate unless you already owned one or married someone who did. If you're lucky, your liege might let you run a border garrison or manage a few sheep-filled fields near a swamp no one wants. If you're less lucky, you become a glorified castle security guard, wearing armor that no longer fits and scaring the kitchen boys more than the enemy. Even among your peers, things change. The young knights don't ask your advice. They just elbow past you on the tournament lists with fresher banners and shinier teeth. You start hearing phrases like outdated and old-fashioned whispered around feasts, often by people who can't tell a lance from a curtain rod. And yet, you still show up. You still kneel properly. You still polish your armor until your fingers cramp. Because your whole identity, your worth, is wrapped up in this nightly package of oaths, steel, and slowly failing knees. What makes it harder is that war itself has started to change. Crossbows are getting more common, and some jerk in Italy just invented gunpowder. Now, a peasant with a tube of smelly black powder can take out a knight from a distance without even needing to know how to spell chivalry. Historians still argue how quickly firearms changed the battlefield, but for many aging knights, the writing was already on the wall, and possibly written in soot. Your body begins to betray you. That shoulder you dislocated at the winter melee still clicks ominously every time it rains. Your back feels like it's packed with gravel. Your once proud stride has become a stiff-legged shuffle with an audible creak. And still, people expect you to attend feasts and look gallant. You sit through endless toasts, laughing at jokes you've heard since you were a squire, lifting a goblet with trembling hands. No one asks about your battles anymore. They ask if you're keeping well. You are not. But you smile and say yes. Even love becomes distant. If you married, chances are it was political. If not, you're now the unattached old knight who makes the ladies uncomfortable and the squires curious. Your tales of glory sound like fairy tales. The duels you once fought now feel like dreams. No one wants to hear about the time you rode for 3 days with a broken ankle to deliver a message during a siege. They want jokes, gossip. The latest court scandal involving someone half your age and twice your bank account. Your horse is old, too. You both limp. You both wheeze in cold weather. You both give each other looks that say, "We should have stopped 2 battles ago." And yet, even in this faded state, you're expected to train others, to mold young squires into something noble. But they don't want discipline. They want fame. They mimic your moves, but not your patience. One of them calls you Sir Rustalot behind your back. You hear it. You pretend not to. You've become a relic, not yet entombed, but no longer relevant. Your banner is moth-eaten. Your name is slowly being mispronounced. Your sword, once sharp enough to shave with, now mostly cuts bread at ceremonial dinners. There are small comforts, though. A quiet corner in the chapel where the floorboards remember your footsteps. A dog that likes sleeping next to your armor rack. The occasional moment when a young knight asks, sincerely, what it was really like at the siege of Béziers. And then there are the dreams. Dreams of battlefields, yes, but not the gory chaos, the wind on your face as you charged, the roar of hooves, the glint of banners at dawn. You remember those? They visit you at night, soft and slow, blending with the silence of your chambers. Maybe, after all, you weren't forgotten. Maybe your worth isn't in the lances won or the tournaments survived, but in the fact that you endured. That even now, with aching bones and a fading name, you still rise, still kneel at Mass, still hold the line, quietly, faithfully. You were a knight, and despite everything, you still are. The fire in the hearth crackles low now, casting a gentle flicker across your aging armor, stored neatly in the corner. Its dents and scuffs a silent record of a life lived on horseback and battlefield. You exhale, slowly. The weight of the years lifts, just a little, as the castle halls fall quiet and the stone walls hold their warmth. Outside, a soft wind stirs the ivy. Somewhere, a bell tolls the hour. Not an alarm, not a call to arms, just time passing, peacefully this time. The aches in your legs have softened into familiarity. Your hands, weathered and strong, rest still. You've done your duty, again and again. Not for glory, but because that's what knights do. The world may be changing, but for now, let it. You close your eyes. The long campaigns, the stormy marches, the roaring tournaments, they all drift away, fading like morning mist over the fields. Tonight, there are no orders to follow, no armor to wear, just breath and quiet. Rest well, Sir Knight.